Julian Vance, the CEO of Vance Global, a man who had built his empire on the bedrock of ambition and ruthlessness, was dying. He knew it with the cold, unyielding certainty of a man who had stared down 1,000 rivals and 1,000 failures. The illness was a silent parasite, a rare and aggressive autoimmune disorder that defied every known medical protocol. It was a cruel irony that a man who controlled the destinies of thousands, a man whose word could move markets and topple governments, was utterly powerless against his own fragile biology. He sat in the antechamber of his private clinic, a sterile, hyper-modern space that felt more like a museum than a place of healing. Through the panoramic window, the city sprawled out like a miniature world, a kingdom he had forged with his own 2 hands. Yet, even as the setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the metropolis, a shadow of a different kind was lengthening over Julian. His skin, once bronzed and vibrant, had taken on a sallow, almost translucent quality. His eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, were now hooded with a perpetual weariness, a cold dread coiled in Julian's stomach. Ilera was up there, alone, terrified. He broke into a run, the stitches in his side protesting with a sharp, insistent pain. He ignored it. The pain was nothing compared to the fear that the girl who saved him might be in danger. Dr. Anya Sharma, a brilliant young geneticist and one of the few doctors who had not yet given up hope, entered the room. Her expression was grave, a silent testament to the grim news she carried. She was one of the few people who dared to speak to Julian without a layer of sycophantic deference. She saw him not as the all-powerful CEO, but as a man fighting a losing battle. Ilera, meanwhile, was at the end of her rope. She was cornered on the roof of the factory, a sheer drop on 3 sides. The men, a trio of hulking figures in black suits, were advancing on her, their faces grim and determined. She had nowhere to go. She backed away, her hands pressed against the grimy brick wall, her eyes wide with a primal terror. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice soft but steady. "We've run the new gene therapy trial. The results are not what we hoped for. Cassandra wants you to disappear, little girl," the lead man said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Don't make this difficult." Julian simply nodded. He didn't need her to spell it out. He felt the failure in his bones, a new, sharp ache that was a signature of the disease's unyielding progression. "How long?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. Ilera shook her head, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. "I didn't do anything," she whispered, her voice a fragile reed in the cold night air. "I just wanted to help." Dr. Sharma hesitated, her gaze dropping to her clipboard. "At this rate, a few months at most, the necrosis is spreading to the core organs. We've exhausted all known treatments." "Kindness is a luxury you can't afford," the man sneered, taking another step forward. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Julian's lips. "Exhausted, I have the best doctors in the world, the finest minds money can buy, and you've all failed." It wasn't an accusation, just a simple, brutal statement of fact. Just as he lunged for her, a figure burst from the stairwell door behind him. It was Julian. He was a force of nature, a man driven by a singular purpose. He moved with a speed that belied his recent illness, a blur of motion and raw power. He slammed into the first man, a bone-jarring impact that sent him sprawling across the roof. Jensen and the rest of the security detail followed, a whirlwind of professional violence. Anya met his gaze, her empathy warring with a professional frustration. "We are working tirelessly, Mr. Vance, but this isn't a business deal you can outmaneuver. It's a genetic anomaly, a biological lottery you didn't win." The ensuing fight was short and brutal. Julian, despite being outnumbered and still weakened from his illness, fought with a ferocity that stunned even his own men. He was no stranger to a fight. He had clawed his way to the top in a world of wolves. He dodged a punch, delivered a crippling blow to the man's knee, and then, with a final, decisive move, disarmed the last man, sending his weapon clattering across the roof. "A lottery I can't buy my way out of," Julian finished for her. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his defeat. He stood up, his body trembling with the effort, and walked to the window. The city lights were beginning to flicker on, a million tiny stars against the darkening canvas of the sky. "Thank you, Doctor. You may go." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, a habit born of years of authority. But as he watched her leave, he felt a wave of profound loneliness. His wealth, his power, his empire. They were all useless. He was a king with no kingdom, a king with no time left. The three men lay groaning on the ground, their mission a spectacular failure. Julian, panting and bleeding from a small gash on his cheek, turned to Alara. She was still pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with shock, staring at him. He was a king in a suit, a man of power and violence, a man from a world she could only dream of. Yet, he had saved her. Julian's vulnerability, however, was not a secret. It was a carefully guarded vulnerability, but one that was known to a select few. Chief among them was his stepsister, Cassandra, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. Cassandra had always lived in Julian's shadow, her ambition dwarfed by his ruthless brilliance. She was a master of passive-aggressive manipulation, a viper in the tall grass. He walked towards her slowly, his hands held up in a gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft, a stark contrast to the violence she had just witnessed. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." She entered the clinic an hour later, her face a perfect mask of concern. She was a vision of expensive grace in a crisp business suit, her every move calculated. "Julian," she said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "I was so worried." Anya said the news wasn't good. Alara flinched, her body tensing. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. Men like him, men with power and money, had only ever brought her pain. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice still shaky. "The news is never good." "Cassandra," Julian replied, not bothering to turn from the window. "Are you here for an update or for a eulogy?" "Julian Vance," he said. "The man you saved." Cassandra's smile tightened for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. "Don't be like that, brother. I only want what's best for you. I've been speaking with the board. They're getting anxious about the succession plan. With your health, well, they need stability." Ilara's eyes widened further. The man from the screen, the man who had fallen, the man whose life was now inexplicably linked to her own. I just wanted to help," she repeated, her mantra of innocence. Julian finally turned, his gaze as sharp as a scalpel. "The board's anxiety is your anxiety. Cassandra, you've been gunning for my chair since the day our father put me in it. Don't think I haven't noticed." Julian nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. "I know, and I'm here to repay that kindness." He gestured towards the helicopters that were now hovering in the distance, their spotlights painting the roofs in a harsh, white light. "You're coming with me. You'll be safe with me." She feigned hurt, her hand going to her chest. "Julian, how can you say that we're family? All I want is for Vance Global to continue to thrive. Even if—" She let the words hang, a silent admission of his impending death. "Even if you're not there to lead it." Alara hesitated, her gaze darting from Julian to the men on the ground. She saw the raw power in his eyes, the ruthless determination that had just saved her life, but she also saw something else, something she hadn't expected: a deep, profound gratitude, a vulnerability she hadn't thought a man like him could possess. She made a choice, a leap of faith into the unknown. She took his hand. "I'm not dead yet," Julian growled, a flicker of his old fire returning. "And I'll be damned if I let you and your puppets on the board carve up my legacy before I've even drawn my last breath. Get out." Back at his heavily guarded penthouse, a world away from the gritty streets, Julian was consumed by a single, all-encompassing thought: understanding the girl who had saved him. He had her name Alara, and a vague description. He now had the girl herself. But he had a nagging feeling that there was more to it than just a random act of kindness. He felt a connection to her, a pull he couldn't explain. Cassandra's perfect facade cracked. For a moment, the mask slipped, and a flash of pure, venomous rage blazed in her eyes. "You arrogant fool!" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you're so untouchable, but you're just a man. And soon, you'll be nothing but a memory. The board will see to it that I am the one who guides this company, and all your precious legacy will belong to me." She turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving Julian to face the city alone once more. He put Jensen's team on high alert, creating a protective bubble around the penthouse. He then turned his attention to a private investigation, a personal quest to uncover the truth. He had Anya and Marcus working with him. their faces a mixture of professional diligence and a growing curiosity. They had the girl's DNA, her blood, and now they had her. Her words, however, did not land on deaf ears. In a secluded corner of a coffee shop a few blocks away, Cassandra was already on the phone with her most trusted accomplice, a senior board member named Richard. "He knows," she whispered, her voice laced with fury. "He's not a fool. We need to move faster. The board meeting next week. We'll propose an interim CEO, with me as his right hand. Once he's gone, the chair is mine." Anya was the first to find a lead. She had been running a deep dive analysis on Ilara's unique genetic markers. The results were perplexing. "The marker is rare. Mr. Vance," she reported, her voice hushed with scientific wonder. "In fact, it's almost unheard of. But it's not unique. There's a match, an old one. A few years ago, a sample was taken from a patient at a private clinic, a man who died in a car accident." Richard's voice, tinny through the phone, was cautious. "What about a cure? What if they find something?" The words hung in the air, a cold, ominous premonition. A man who died in a car accident. Julian's mind immediately went to his estranged brother, Alexander. He and Julian had had a bitter falling out years ago, a disagreement over business that had never healed. Alexander had died in a car crash, an accident Julian had always suspected was no accident at all. The thought had been a passing one, a ghost in his memory. But now it felt like a cold, hard fact. Cassandra scoffed. "A cure. The best minds in the world have failed. Richard, Thorne himself told me the man's a dead end. No, this is it. We just need to wait for nature to take its course, and then we'll swoop in and take what is rightfully ours. I've waited long enough for this. I will not fail." She ended the call, her smile returning, a cold, predatory curve of her lips. The hunt was on, and Julian was the prey. "Who was the patient?" "Anya," Julian asked, his voice low and dangerous. Meanwhile, on the grimy streets far below Julian's penthouse, a different kind of life unfolded. Ilara, a girl of 16, was a ghost in the city's concrete canyons. She had no home, no family, and no past she could remember beyond the last few years of hardship. Her world was not one of glass towers and expensive suits, but of cold pavement, discarded newspapers, and the fleeting warmth of a sunbeam on a winter's day. "The records were sealed, Mr. Vance," Anya said, "but the clinic's records, they were handled by a Dr. Thorne." Her face, smudged with dirt and streaked with the lines of perpetual fatigue, was still a thing of fragile beauty. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a depth of sadness and resilience that belied her young age. She wore layers of tattered clothes, a makeshift armor against the biting cold, and her feet were clad in shoes she had found in a dumpster. Her only possession of value was a worn-out locket that hung around her neck, its chain a thin silver thread against her skin. She had no memory of where it came from, but it was a comfort, a small piece of a past she couldn't remember. The name was a thunderclap. Thorne, the same man who had been conspiring with Cassandra to let Julian die. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a pattern of betrayal and murder. Today had been a particularly bad day. The rain had been relentless, soaking her meager possessions and chilling her to the bone. She was huddled in the mouth of an alley, the smell of refuse and damp concrete her only companions. Her stomach growled, a hollow, persistent ache. Meanwhile, Ilara, now bathed and clothed in soft fabrics, was finally able to rest. But her mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. She clutched the old locket around her neck, its chain a thin, comforting weight against her skin. She had never opened it, had always been too afraid to face whatever past it held. But now, she felt a strange, new courage. She needed to know. She opened the locket, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. "We have a heat signature on the old textile factory," Jensen reported through Julian's earpiece. "Looks like 3 men. Cassandra's detail. They're closing in on a roof access." Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, her face a mirror image of Ilara's, and a tiny, cryptic symbol. It was a symbol she had seen only once before, in a picture book she had found in the library. It was the symbol of the Vance family crest, a symbol that had been lost for decades. A small, sincere, whimpering sound drew her attention. A stray dog, a scrawny mutt with a matted coat, was huddled against a dumpster, its tail tucked between its legs. Its eyes, full of a terrified hunger, met hers. Ilara's heart, despite her own desperation, went out to the creature. She reached into her ragged bag and pulled out the half-eaten loaf of bread she had salvaged earlier. It was all she had. She broke the loaf in half and gently pushed it towards the dog. Ilara's world, a world she thought she knew, had just been turned on its head. She was not just a homeless girl. She was a Vance. And the man who had just saved her life was not just a CEO. He was her uncle, a profound, shocking revelation that would change everything. The dog, at first hesitant, finally crept forward and devoured the bread in a few quick, grateful gulps. Ilara watched, a small, sad smile on her face. She had no idea why she did it. Why she gave away the last of her food to a creature she didn't know? It was just a part of who she was. A quiet, unshakable kindness that had survived the cruelty of the streets. The morning sun, filtered through the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, cast a soft, golden light on Julian's face. He was a man with a new purpose, a man no longer defined by his wealth or his illness, but by a debt of gratitude he was determined to repay. Ilara, now resting peacefully in a plush guest room, was both his savior and his responsibility. Later that afternoon, as the rain finally subsided, Ilara found herself near a public square. A large screen, normally reserved for advertisements, was showing a live news report. She stopped, drawn in by the bright lights and the sound of the reporter's voice. The screen showed a man, impeccably dressed, standing on a podium. It was Julian Vance, the CEO. His face was a common sight, an icon of wealth and power. But today, he looked different. He looked tired, frail, a shadow of the man she had seen on the news 100 times before. Julian had spent the entire night in his home office, a whirlwind of phone calls and frantic research. Anya and Marcus were with him, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and a growing, consuming curiosity. The revelation of Thorne's treachery had opened a Pandora's box of questions, and Julian, a man who had built an empire on uncovering truths, was relentless. The reporter spoke of his latest business deals, his unassailable empire, but the words felt hollow. Ilara watched as the man swayed, his hand clutching at his chest. A gasp went through the crowd on the screen, and Julian's face, a mask of pain, went slack. He collapsed, his body crumpling to the floor in a sickening heap. Dr. Thorne's medical license was suspended once before, Anya reported, her voice hushed with disbelief. For gross negligence in a clinical trial, he was reinstated, but the records were sealed. It was a powerful family that pulled the strings to get him back in. A sudden, sharp pain shot through Ilara's wrist, right where the worn silver chain of her locket rested. She clutched at it, her knuckles white. It was a strange, inexplicable pang, a sympathetic resonance that felt both familiar and foreign. She didn't know the man on the screen. She didn't know his name or his world. Yet, as she watched him fall, she felt a flicker of something she had never felt before, a profound, empathetic ache, a strange, undeniable connection to a man who was a world away. Cassandra, Julian growled, the name a venomous hiss on his lips. She's always had a knack for finding the scum of the earth and making them her allies. As frantic paramedics rushed to the CEO's side, and the screen went black, Ilara's world, so separate from Julian Vance's, had just been irrevocably, tragically linked to his Marcus. Meanwhile, had been digging into the old records of Julian's estranged brother, Alexander. Alexander was a lot like you, sir, he said, his voice tinged with a nostalgic sadness. Ambitious, but he had a softer side. He fell in love with a woman, a graphic designer named Elena. You never met her, sir? You two had just had your falling out over the company merger. The world around Julian Vance shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. One moment, he was standing at the pinnacle of his power, 1,000 cameras flashing, 100 reporters hanging on his every word. The next, the ground rushed up to meet him, a cold, indifferent force. The last thing he saw was the horrified face of his stepsister, Cassandra. And the last thing he heard was her voice, a distant, mocking echo. He was falling, not just to the floor, but into a black, endless void. Julian felt a pang of regret, a sharp ache of what could have been. I was a fool, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I let a business deal come between me and my own brother. I should have been there for him. In the chaotic aftermath of the CEO's collapse, a young homeless girl named Ilara a ghost in the city's underbelly, found herself in the middle of a maelstrom. She had been scavenging near the public square, her mind a million miles away, when the large screen showed Julian Vance's dramatic collapse. A strange, sympathetic pain had shot through her wrist, a pang that felt both alien and strangely familiar. Now, in the real world, the panic was palpable. A crowd of onlookers surged forward, only to be held back by a wall of security guards. Sirens wailed in the distance, a mournful dirge. Elena disappeared shortly after Alexander's death, Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the digital archives. The police report said she went into hiding, distraught. They never found her. Her family had long since passed. She was alone in the world. Amidst the chaos, Ilara's instincts, honed by years of surviving on the streets, took over. She saw not the CEO of Vance Global, but a human being in pain. She slipped through the cracks of the crowd and the security cordon, her small, wiry frame unnoticed. She reached the fallen man, her heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and an inexplicable urge to help. She knelt beside him, her hands, grimy and calloused, hovering over his face. He was pale, his lips blue, and a faint rattling sound was coming from his chest. The pieces were starting to form a grim picture. Alexander, Elena, Thorne, and Cassandra, a web of lies and betrayal that stretched back years. Julian's suspicion was no longer a ghost, it was a living, breathing monster. "He's not breathing right," she whispered to no one in particular, her voice barely audible over the growing din. She saw a tiny trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth and a tremor in his hand, which was clenched in a fist. She gently placed her hand on his, her touch surprisingly soft, a small island of calm in a sea of panic. "Don't worry," she murmured, a promise to a stranger. "It's going to be okay." Just then, a small, tentative knock on the office door interrupted their grim detective work. It was Ilara. She was bathed, her face scrubbed clean, and she wore a simple white t-shirt and a pair of soft sweatpants. She looked different, no longer a ghost of the streets, but a frightened girl in a strange, opulent world. It was a simple, compassionate act, a small gesture of human kindness that went unnoticed by most, but it was not unnoticed by everyone. Dr. Anya Sharma, who had been a part of the medical team on standby, was pushing her way through the crowd, a frantic urgency in her movements. She was the only one who saw the girl. She saw the genuine concern in her eyes, the gentle, reassuring touch, and a strange, almost luminescent mark on the girl's wrist, a mark that pulsed faintly with a warm light. As Ilara's hand touched Julian's, Anya saw a sudden, brief flicker of something on the heart monitor. It was a fleeting moment, a spike in the otherwise flat line of a failing man. She dismissed it as a glitch, but the image of the girl's face, full of a raw, untainted compassion, was burned into her memory. She clutched a small, worn-out locket in her hand, its silver chain a thin thread against her skin. I found this," she said, her voice a soft, trembling whisper. "I don't know what it means." Paramedics finally reached Julian, pushing Ilara aside. She recoiled, a small, frightened creature retreating into the shadows. The paramedics, focused on the dying billionaire, paid her no mind. But as they loaded Julian onto a gurney, the sharp-eyed Dr. Sharma caught a glimpse of her again. "Wait!" she called out, but the gurney was already being wheeled away, and Ilara had vanished into the crowd. Julian, his heart pounding with a sudden, inexplicable sense of premonition, took the locket from her. The metal was cold against his skin, a relic of a past he didn't know he had. He opened it, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman with a kind, gentle face, a face that was the mirror image of Ilara's. Next to it, a small, intricate symbol. Julian was rushed to the city's most advanced hospital, a place of hushed halls and gleaming chrome. He was placed in a sterile, private suite, with a team of specialists working feverishly to stabilize him. Dr. Thorne, a renowned cardiologist who was secretly on Cassandra's payroll, was leading the effort. He was a man with a smooth, professional demeanor and a cruel, calculating heart. He was there not to save Julian, but to manage his descent into death, to make it look like they had tried everything. It was the Vance family crest, a symbol that had been lost for decades, a secret passed down only through the male bloodline. Julian had a matching one, a small engraved tattoo on his chest, a memory of a family he had long since left behind. The organs are failing, Thorne announced to the team, his voice a low, somber tone. The blood oxygen levels are plummeting. We've administered the last known treatments. It's a matter of hours now. He looked from the locket to Alara, his eyes wide with a profound, earth-shattering realization. The girl who had saved him was not just a homeless waif. She was a Vance, his brother's daughter, his niece. The girl who had saved his life was family. Dr. Sharma, however, was not convinced. She was a geneticist, not a cardiologist. But she had a gut feeling, a scientist's intuition. She had seen something, a resonance between the dying man and the homeless girl. She had to find the girl. She raced out of the sterile suite, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and theories. She found Julian's personal assistant, Marcus, a loyal, no-nonsense man who had been with Julian for years. He was pacing the hall, his face a mask of barely contained panic. Alara, seeing the shock and a strange, sorrowful affection in his eyes, flinched. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "Who is that?" "Marcus." "I need your help," Anya said, her voice urgent. "I need you to find a girl. She was in the square when Mr. Vance collapsed. She was homeless, maybe 16 or 17. She has a mark on her wrist." "Your mother?" Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Her name was Elena. And my brother, Alexander. He was your father, Marcus, a man used to dealing with corporate espionage and ruthless business rivals. Looked at her as if she were insane. A homeless girl. Dr. Sharma. This is a medical emergency. The board is arriving. Cassandra is trying to take control." The words hung in the air, a devastating truth that shattered Alara's world. She was not alone. She had a past, a family, and that family was the same one that had orchestrated her father's death and her own long years of suffering. "This is the key," Anya insisted, her voice rising. "I don't know why, but I saw a connection, a resonance. Her touch. It caused a brief spike on the heart monitor. I need her blood, her DNA, might be the key to saving him." Tears welled up in her eyes, a torrent of emotion she had kept buried for years. She was not an orphan of the streets. She was a victim of a cruel, powerful conspiracy, a pawn in a deadly game she hadn't even known she was playing. Marcus, though skeptical, saw the desperate sincerity in her eyes. He had nothing to lose. He made a few calls, and within minutes, the city's vast network of surveillance cameras was being scoured for a girl with a particular face and a distinctive, ethereal mark on her wrist. Julian, his heart aching with a profound guilt, knelt before her, his hands gently holding hers. "I am so sorry, Alara," he said, his voice raw with remorse. "I was a fool. I didn't know. I should have been there for my brother. For you." The search led them to a precinct where Alara, confused and scared, was being questioned. She had been detained for loitering, and the police, sensing a story, were trying to get a statement from her. As Marcus and Anya burst into the precinct, Alara was shivering in a corner, her small frame curled into itself. Alara looked at him, her eyes, once filled with terror, now a stormy sea of pain and confusion. "My father, he was murdered," she whispered. "That's her," Anya said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and scientific curiosity. She rushed to Alara, her professional demeanor giving way to a raw, human concern. "Are you okay? We need your help. It's about the man you helped in the square." "I believe so," Julian said, his voice hardening with resolve. "And I believe Cassandra and Thorne are responsible. They killed my brother to get to me, and they tried to kill you to keep the truth from ever seeing the light of day. But they failed." Ilara's eyes, wide with fear, darted from Anya to Marcus, a towering man in an expensive suit. "I didn't do anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I just wanted to help." He stood up, his face a mask of grim determination. "They failed, Alara. And they're going to regret it. I'm going to make them pay for every lie, every betrayal, every single moment of pain they caused you. I'm going to get you justice. I promise you that." "I know," Anya said, her voice gentle. "And we believe you. But you did something remarkable. You saved him, and we need you to do it again. We need a sample of your blood." Alara, who had spent her life being used and abused, flinched. The idea of giving up a part of herself, a part of her body, was terrifying. But as she looked into Anya's eyes, she saw not the calculating coldness she had come to expect, but a genuine plea for help. She saw the same look she had seen on the face of the stray dog she had fed just hours ago. She saw a reflection of her own compassion. Back at the hospital, Julian's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Dr. Thorne was preparing to call his time of death, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He was about to deliver the news to Cassandra, a prearranged signal that the final phase of their plan was in motion. The truth, once a ghost in the shadows, was now a tangible, terrifying reality. Alara, once a girl without a past, was a niece without a family. And Julian, a man without an heir, had found one in the most unexpected of places. The shock of the revelation hung in the air, a heavy, silent presence in the opulent office. Julian, a man of action, knew they had no time to waste. He had to act. Just as Thorne was reaching for the phone, Anya and Marcus burst into the room, with a frightened, pale Alara in tow. "Dr. Thorne, we have a donor," Anya announced, holding up a small vial of Alara's blood. "This girl. Her blood is a perfect match." Marcus," Julian said, his voice a low, gravelly command. "I need you to find every piece of evidence related to my brother's death. The police report, the medical records, the financial statements. I want it all. I want to know who was with him, where he was, and what happened in the hours leading up to the accident." Thorne scoffed. "A match? That's impossible. We've run thousands of tests. There is no match. This is a homeless girl. This is preposterous. Get her out of here." Marcus, his face a mask of grim determination, nodded and began to make a series of calls. His loyalty to Julian was absolute, and this was no longer a business deal. This was a vendetta. "I ran the preliminary scan myself," Anya retorted, her voice firm. "The genetic markers, they're an exact match. It's a miracle. We have to try." Anya, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of scientific fervor. "I'm going to run a full DNA workup on Alara," she said, her voice filled with a professional urgency. "I need to confirm the lineage, the genetic markers. I'll need to cross-reference it with your blood. Mr. Vance, it's the only way to be certain." Marcus, with the authority of Julian's most trusted confidant, stepped forward. "Dr. Thorne, do it, or I'll have you removed from this hospital and stripped of your license. Now." Julian, a man who had always been a master of his own emotions, felt a profound wave of guilt wash over him. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant man who had let a petty family dispute fester for years. He had allowed his brother to die alone, a ghost in his own life, and he had allowed his niece to suffer on the streets, a victim of a conspiracy he should have been there to stop. He knelt beside Alara, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. Thorne, faced with a man who wielded more power than he could ever imagine, had no choice. He conceded with a tight, resentful smile. The high-stakes, emergency blood transfusion was set in motion. As Alara's blood began to course through Julian's veins, a strange and powerful thing happened. The flat line on the heart monitor, which had been a steady, morbid rhythm, suddenly flickered, then spiked. The color began to return to Julian's face. His breathing, once ragged and shallow, deepened into a steady rhythm. The necrosis, which had been spreading like a plague, began to recede. "I am so sorry." "Alara," he said, his voice raw with remorse. "I should have been there. I should have protected you. I failed my brother, and I failed you. I won't fail you again. I promise." Julian Vance, the man who had been at death's door, was not just stabilized, he was cured. The impossible had happened. The homeless girl's blood, a small, unassuming act of kindness, had saved the life of the most powerful man in the city. Alara looked at him, her eyes, once filled with terror, now a torrent of pain and confusion. She had spent her entire life believing she was an orphan, an outcast. Now, she was told she was a part of a powerful family, a family that had, in a way, been responsible for her suffering. "Why?" she whispered, the question a fragile thread in the tapestry of her pain. Why would they do this? But as joy and relief filled the room, a new, dark conflict was brewing. Cassandra, who had been waiting for the news of Julian's death, burst into the room, her face a mask of triumph that quickly turned to shock and fury. She saw Julian, no longer dying, but sleeping peacefully, his face serene. She saw Anya, Marcus, and the small, sick, frightened girl who had performed the miracle. The truth, ugly and undeniable, dawned on her. The girl was a threat, a loose end. Power, Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. And greed. The two most dangerous things in the world. They wanted everything my brother and I had built, and they were willing to kill to get it. They tried to kill me. Ilara. And they would have, if it weren't for you. As Cassandra turned to leave, her gaze, cold and full of hatred, fell on Ilara. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the keypad. The girl, she hissed to her security detail. She's at the hospital. Find her and make sure she never speaks a word of this to anyone. She is to disappear. Now. Ilara's hand went to the locket, its silver chain a comforting weight against her skin. It was the only thing she had left of her past, the only tangible proof of a life she had never known. She opened it, her fingers tracing the faded photograph of her mother, Elena, her face a mirror of her own, and next to it, the tiny, intricate symbol of the Vance family crest. Ilara, once again, was a ghost, but this time she was a ghost being hunted. This, she said, her voice gaining a newfound strength, this is all I have. I found it when I was a little girl. I never knew what it meant. I never knew it was a key. Julian Vance awoke to the blindingly white ceiling of his hospital suite. The sterile scent of antiseptic and the low hum of medical equipment were the first things he registered. He expected a familiar, crushing ache in his chest, the dull throb of a body betraying itself. Instead, he felt nothing. A profound, almost shocking sense of peace filled him, a quiet strength he hadn't felt in months. He was alive. Anya, who had been listening in silent awe, stepped forward. Ilara, may I see that? She asked, her voice gentle and respectful. Dr. Anya Sharma was at his bedside, her face a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her eyes, usually so serious, were bright with a triumphant joy. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice shaky with relief. You're a miracle. It worked. The blood transfusion? It worked. Ilara, with a newfound trust in the woman who had saved her life, handed her the locket. Anya examined it under a magnifying glass, her face a mask of scientific concentration. The symbol? It's not just a crest, she said, her voice hushed with wonder. It's a code, a message. It's an old form of encryption, used by the Vance family for centuries. It's a key to a secret vault, a hidden legacy. Julian's brow furrowed in confusion. Blood transfusion. What are you talking about? His last memory was the world dissolving into a black void. The words hung in the air, a shocking revelation that sent a jolt of excitement through Julian. A secret vault, a hidden legacy. It was a classic corporate fairy tale, a story he had dismissed as a myth. But now, it was real. And it was the key to proving Cassandra's guilt. Marcus, his ever-loyal assistant, stepped forward, his face tight with a strange combination of relief and a simmering anxiety. A young girl, sir. A homeless girl. Her blood had a unique genetic marker. It reversed the illness. Dr. Sharma insisted on the procedure, and, well, she was right. Marcus, his face pale with a dawning realization, spoke up. I remember hearing something about that, he said, his voice a whisper. A secret safe, hidden in the old family estate. It was Alexander's favorite place. He used to say it was where he kept his most precious secrets. A single, powerful image flashed in Julian's mind, a small, gentle hand. Grimy, but comforting. On his... The soft murmur of a voice. A promise whispered in the chaos. He didn't know how he remembered it, but the memory was sharp and clear. A beacon in the fog of his near-death experience. The girl, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. Where is she? Julian's mind was racing. He knew the estate. It was a place of ghosts and memories, a place he had avoided for years. But now, it was his destination. He had to go back. He had to find the secret vault. He had to find the truth. Marcus and Anya exchanged a nervous glance. That's it, the complicated part, Marcus began. After the procedure, your stepsister, Cassandra, showed up. When she saw you were alive, she looked terrified. She gave orders to her security detail to find the girl, to make her disappear. He looked at Ilara, his eyes once cold and ruthless, now a deep, compassionate sea of determination. "We're going to find the truth, Ilara," he said. "We're going to find out what happened to your father, and we're going to make them pay." Julian's newfound peace evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing fury. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Cassandra's feigned sympathy, her subtle pressure on the board, the grim diagnosis from Thorne, it all made sense now. She wasn't just a rival, she was a murderer. "Thorne," Julian growled, the name a curse on his lips. "He was in on it, wasn't he?" The two of them, a billionaire CEO and a homeless girl, were now partners in a quest for truth and justice. Their worlds had collided in a catastrophic accident, and out of the ashes, a new kind of family, a new kind of love, had been born. The hunt for Cassandra was no longer just a corporate battle. It was a personal mission. A mission to reclaim a lost family and a stolen legacy. Anya nodded, her face grim. "He was deliberately misdiagnosing you, Mr. Vance. His every action was designed to lead us to believe your death was inevitable. He fought us every step of the way when we found Alara's blood." The old Vance family estate was a monument to a bygone era, a sprawling manor house filled with ghosts and memories. It was a place Julian had avoided for years, a place where he and his brother, Alexander, had grown up together, their bond as strong as the ancient oaks that stood sentinel on the lawn. Now, he returned, not as a prodigal son, but as a man on a mission. "Alara," Julian repeated, the name tasting like a whisper on his tongue. "That was her name. The girl who saved me." He sat up, his body protesting with a few stiff aches, but the core strength was there, undeniable. "I need to find her. Now. Before Cassandra does." He stood in the grand foyer, the marble floor gleaming under the chandeliers, a silent testament to a family's long and storied past. Ilara stood beside him, her small hand clutching his, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation. This was her family's home, a home she had never known, a home filled with both ghosts and secrets. As if on cue, the door to the suite opened, and Cassandra entered, a forced smile plastered on her face. It was a flawless performance of concern, but Julian saw the predatory glint in her eyes. "Julian, darling, you're awake. We were so worried. The board has been in a frenzy, but thank heavens, you're all right." "The secret vault," Julian said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Alexander always talked about it. He said it was a place where he kept his most precious secrets. I never knew he was being literal. "Cut the act, Cassandra," Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. "I know everything." Anya and Marcus, ever loyal, followed close behind. They were no longer just a doctor and an assistant. They were a team of detectives, a family united by a shared purpose. They had the locket, the key to the vault, and they had the truth. A truth that was about to be unleashed on the world. Her smile didn't waver, but a subtle tension crept into her shoulders. "Everything? What are you talking about?" "Julian, the miracle. Yes, it's truly wonderful news. The vault was hidden behind a false bookcase in the family library, a place where Alexander had spent countless hours reading, a place of peace and solace." Julian, his heart pounding with a mixture of grief and anticipation, placed the locket into a small, intricate slot on the side of the bookcase. There was a low click, a soft whirring sound, and the bookcase swung open, revealing a small, hidden room. The two of them, a billionaire CEO and a homeless girl, stood united by a shared past of loss and a shared future of revenge. The war for Vance Global was no longer a corporate battle. It was a family matter. And Julian Vance, a man who had stared death in the face and walked away, was about to unleash a hellstorm on the people who had wronged him and the girl who had saved his life. The room was filled with old papers, books, and a single, locked safe. Julian, a man who had built an empire on uncovering truths, felt a sense of profound awe. This was it, the key to everything. He looked at Alara, a silent promise in his eyes. "This is for your father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't play dumb. I know you and Thorne were conspiring against me. I know you were waiting for me to die so you could take Vance Global for yourself." He leaned forward, his eyes, now a piercing and ruthless steel, boring into hers. "And I know you sent your men after the girl who saved me. the one you want to silence. He opened the safe, and inside, he found a treasure trove of secrets. A detailed journal, penned in Alexander's familiar, elegant script, a series of audio recordings, and a stack of financial documents. He and Anya worked tirelessly, poring over the evidence. Their faces grim as the truth, ugly and undeniable, came to light. Cassandra's facade finally shattered. A cold, venomous rage took its place. "You can't prove a thing," she hissed. "It's your word against mine. And who would believe the word of a man who just clawed his way back from the grave? Thorne will back me up. The board trusts me. They will never believe you. Julian, you're losing your mind." Alexander's journal was a heartbreaking account of his final days. He had discovered Cassandra's treachery, her plot to take over the company. He had documented everything, every secret meeting, every forged document, every lie. He had also discovered her collusion with Dr. Thorne, the same man who had tried to let Julian die. "I'm not losing my mind," Julian said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I'm just getting it back. And the first thing I'm going to do is find Alara, the girl you sent your hounds to hunt. And when I do, I will have all the proof I need." The audio recordings were even more damning. They were a series of conversations between Cassandra and Thorne, a cold, calculating exchange of information about their plot. Thorne's voice, smug and self-satisfied, talked about his deliberate misdiagnoses, his careful manipulation of the medical reports, and his plan to let Julian die a slow, painful death. Cassandra's voice, a low, venomous hiss, talked about the board, the company, and her final, triumphant takeover. Cassandra, seeing the unwavering resolve in his eyes, panicked. She turned on her heel and fled the room, leaving a trail of cold air and bitter promises. Her mission was clear. She had to get to Alara before Julian did. The financial documents were the final nail in the coffin. They were a trail of money, a series of secret accounts and offshore transactions, a clear paper trail that led directly to Cassandra's accounts. She had been funneling money out of the company for years, a slow, steady stream of corporate theft. The evidence was irrefutable. The case was closed. Alara, meanwhile, was a terrified rabbit on the run. She had escaped the hospital, a blur of fear and adrenaline. As soon as she heard Cassandra's menacing voice on the phone, she had slipped into the service corridors, found a back exit, and vanished into the city's labyrinthine streets. She had no money, no phone, and no one to trust. She was once again alone, but this time, the stakes were higher. She wasn't just running from hunger, she was running for her life. Julian, his face a mask of cold, righteous fury, looked at Alara, his eyes burning with a deep, consuming fire. "It's over," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "They're going to pay for what they did." She found refuge in an abandoned warehouse, a cavernous space filled with dust and shadows. She huddled in a corner, her small body trembling. The locket around her neck felt heavy, a small, cold weight against her skin. It was her only connection to a past she couldn't remember, a past that now seemed to hold a terrifying key to her present. He then called the police, a single, decisive act of justice. He laid out all the evidence, the journal, the audio recordings, the financial documents, a complete and damning case against his stepsister and her accomplice. As she shivered in the cold, she heard a sound, the distant wail of a siren. It was a sound she was used to, a part of the city's symphony of sorrow. But today, it felt different, closer, more menacing. She saw the headlights of a black sedan pull up to the warehouse entrance. The door opened, and a large man in a dark suit stepped out, his face a grim, professional mask. He was followed by another, and another, Cassandra's security detail. The hunt was on. The next day, at a highly anticipated board meeting, Cassandra, a vision of expensive grace in a sharp business suit, was at the peak of her arrogance. She was about to announce her interim CEO role, a position that would give her full control of Vance Global. She was about to win. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was cornered. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind racing. She had to get out. She scrambled to her feet, her gaze darting around the massive, shadowy space. She saw a small opening in the ceiling, a broken skylight, and she knew she had to try. Just as she was about to speak, the doors to the boardroom opened, and Julian walked in. He was a man reborn, his face filled with a cold, righteous fury. He was followed by Alara, her small hand clutching his, her eyes filled with a quiet, unwavering strength. He was a king returning to his throne, and she was his queen, his heir, his family. With a superhuman effort born of pure desperation, she climbed a stack of old crates, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on the splintered wood. She reached the skylight, her hands raw and bleeding, and pushed the broken pane aside. She was on the roof, the cold night air a shocking jolt to her senses. Below, she could hear the men shouting, their heavy footsteps echoing through the empty warehouse. Julian walked to the head of the table, his gaze a ruthless steel. He looked at Cassandra, a venomous smirk on his face. "Cassandra," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're a fool. You thought you could kill me, steal my company, and get away with it. You thought you could erase my brother's legacy and let his daughter suffer on the streets. You were wrong." She ran, a tiny figure against the backdrop of the city's skyline, leaping from one roof to the next, her fear a constant thrumming companion. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to keep moving, had to stay one step ahead of the people who wanted her silent, wanted her gone. He then laid out all the evidence, the journal, the audio recordings, the financial documents, a complete and damning case against her. The board members, a group of powerful men and women, sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Julian, meanwhile, was a man reborn, a predator on the hunt. He had his own security detail, a team of ex-Special Forces operatives led by a man named Jensen, a man whose loyalty to Julian was absolute. "Find her," Julian ordered, his voice a low, gravelly command. "Use every resource at your disposal. I want her found, and I want Cassandra's men neutralized." Just then, the police, a silent, grim-faced force, walked into the room. They had a warrant for Cassandra's arrest. They took her away, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, her dreams of power and wealth shattered in a single moment. Dr. Thorne was also arrested, a smug, self-satisfied man who had been undone by his own greed. Marcus, the ever-pragmatic assistant, stepped in. "Sir, we have to be careful. Cassandra still has allies on the board. We can't act rashly." Julian stood at the head of the table, a man who had stared into the face of death and walked away. A man who had lost his brother and found his niece. He looked at Alara, his eyes, once filled with cold, corporate ruthlessness, now a deep, compassionate sea of love and affection. He had lost a brother, but he had found a daughter. The hunt for justice was over. The journey of family had just begun. "Rashly," Julian snarled, his eyes burning. "She tried to kill me, Marcus. She's now trying to kill the girl who saved my life. You think I care about the board? I'll tear this company down brick by brick if it means saving Alara. Now, find her." Justice had been served. The grand, echoing halls of Vance Global, once filled with the whispers of betrayal, were now cleansed, purified by the raw, undeniable force of truth. Julian Vance, the CEO who had nearly lost his life, stood at the head of the boardroom table, a man reborn. He looked at the faces of the board, now humbled and silent, and then at the face of the young girl who stood beside him, her hand still clutched in his. The search was a digital cat-and-mouse game. Jensen's team, with the help of Anya's technical expertise, began scouring the city's CCTV footage, tracing Alara's movements from the hospital. They saw her, a small, frightened shadow, darting through the streets, her face a mask of terror. They saw Cassandra's men, a grim, determined posse, following in her wake. Alara was no longer a ghost of the streets. She was a Vance, a member of a powerful family, a girl with a past and a future she could finally claim as her own. The terror in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, unwavering strength, a resilience born of a life of hardship and a newfound hope. She was a testament to the power of kindness, a living monument to a love that transcended bloodlines and corporate empires. "She's heading towards the old industrial district," Jensen reported, his voice flat and professional. "She's on foot. Cassandra's men are closing in." Julian, a man who had built his empire on a foundation of ruthless ambition, now found himself building a new one, a legacy of compassion and forgiveness. He had lost his brother, a loss that had haunted him for years, but he had found his niece, a profound, earth-shattering discovery that had changed the very course of his life. He looked at her, his eyes, once filled with cold, corporate ruthlessness, now a deep, compassionate sea of love and affection. He had lost a brother, but he had found a daughter. Julian felt a surge of cold dread. "Go," he commanded. "Go now. I'm coming with you." He dedicated himself to making amends for his past arrogance and creating a better life for his newly found niece. He established the Vance Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to helping homeless youth. It was a tribute to Alara's resilience, a promise to a past he couldn't change and a future he was determined to make better. "Sir, with all due respect, you're still recovering?" Marcus protested. The story of the dying CEO and the homeless girl who saved him became a legend, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness, a story that was told in the halls of Vance Global, in the hallowed halls of the city's hospitals, and in the quiet, desolate corners of the city's streets. "I said I'm coming with you," Julian repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The girl who saved me is not going to die because I was too weak to help her." He grabbed his coat, his movements swift and decisive, a man of power once again. He was no longer a dying CEO, but a man on a mission, a man who owed a debt he could never fully repay, and who was determined to honor it with his life. He was going to find Alara, and he was going to make sure she was safe. And when he did, he was going to make Cassandra pay for her betrayal. Julian and Alara, a man of wealth and a girl of the streets, were now a family. They had found each other in the most unexpected of places, in the midst of a corporate conspiracy and a near-death experience. Their story was a testament to the power of destiny, to the fact that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful force in the world. It was a story of a man who had everything, but found his true wealth in a girl who had nothing. The city, with its millions of stories, had just become a battlefield, and the prize was not an empire, but a single, frightened girl whose only crime was an act of kindness. The journey of family had just begun. The streets of the old industrial district were a maze of forgotten factories and decaying warehouses, a stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers that defined Julian Vance's world. Here, the air smelled of rust and damp concrete, and the silence was punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic and the mournful groan of a shifting building. This was Alara's world, a world of shadows and echoes, and now it had become Julian's as well. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Julian, despite his recent brush with death, moved with a ruthless efficiency that only a man of his power and determination could possess. He was in his element, a hunter pursuing his prey. But his prey was not an enemy. It was a frightened girl, and the hunt was not for vengeance, but for redemption. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. His security team, led by the stoic Jensen, fanned out across the district, a silent, deadly force. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, their movements fluid and their communication a series of terse, low-pitched words. Marcus, the ever-pragmatic assistant, stayed close to Julian, his face a mixture of worry and awe. He had never seen his boss so driven, so consumed by a single purpose that had nothing to do with corporate profits or hostile takeovers.